Young plumber married a 75-year-old millionaire woman for money. 3 days later, he was shocked by what he saw. The ornate gates creaked open as Trevor's van rolled up the long driveway leading to Margaret's mansion. The estate was breathtaking, manicured gardens stretched as far as the eye could see, the scent of blooming roses lingering in the air. The mansion itself, a grand stone structure with towering windows and intricate detailing, looked like something out of a movie. Trevor parked his van, stepping out with his toolbox in hand. His worn jeans and work boots felt glaringly out of place against the backdrop of such opulence. He took a deep breath, shaking off his initial intimidation. This wasn't the first time he'd worked in a wealthy neighborhood, but this house was on a whole different level. As he rang the doorbell, the massive wooden door swung open almost immediately. Standing before him was Margaret, a petite woman with striking silver hair neatly pinned up. She wore an elegant blouse and slacks, her posture straight and her gaze sharp. Despite her age, there was a commanding presence about her, one that Trevor found both intimidating and intriguing. "You must be the plumber," Margaret said, her voice smooth and steady. "Yes, Mom," Trevor replied, offering a polite smile. "I'm Trevor. I'm here to fix the leak in the upstairs bathroom." Margaret nodded, stepping aside to let him in. "Right this way." Trevor followed her through the marble-floored foyer, his eyes darting to the grand staircase, the glittering chandelier above, and the artwork lining the walls. Each piece seemed more valuable than anything he'd ever owned. "You have a beautiful home," he said, trying to make small talk. Margaret glanced over her shoulder, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Thank you. It's been my sanctuary for many years." They reached the bathroom, an expansive space with gleaming fixtures and an oversized tub that could have doubled as a small pool. Trevor set down his toolbox and got to work, the sound of his tools echoing in the marble room. Margaret lingered nearby, watching him with a curious expression. "So Trevor," she began, her tone conversational, "how long have you been a plumber?" "About 5 years," he replied, not looking up from his work. "It's honest work, but I'm hoping to move up someday. Start my own business, maybe." "Ambitious," Margaret said, crossing her arms. "Ambition is good, but it can also be dangerous if it blinds you to other things." Trevor paused, glancing up at her. "I don't see how wanting to make a better life for myself is dangerous." Margaret tilted her head slightly, studying him. "You think money is the key to a better life?" "Isn't it?" Trevor countered, leaning back on his heels. "Look at this house, the life you have. If I had this kind of money, I wouldn't have to worry about anything." Margaret's smile widened, though there was a hint of something deeper in her expression, amusement perhaps, or maybe wisdom. "You think this house means I don't worry about anything, doesn't it?" Trevor asked, his tone almost defensive. Margaret stepped closer, her gaze piercing. "Money solves problems, Trevor, but it doesn't fix people. It doesn't bring happiness or fulfillment, not the kind that lasts, anyway." Trevor frowned, unsure how to respond. "Maybe, but it sure makes life easier." "For a time," Margaret said, her voice softening. "But the things that truly matter, connection, purpose, love, money can't buy those. If you spend your life chasing wealth, you might find yourself more lost than you were when you started." Trevor let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "No offense, but that's easy for you to say. You've already made it. You don't know what it's like to scrape by." Margaret's expression didn't falter. If anything, her eyes seemed to gleam with understanding. "Don't I?" There was a moment of silence, heavy but not uncomfortable. Finally, Trevor cleared his throat, returning his focus to the pipes. "Well, I'm not trying to be rude. I've seen what life's like without money. It's not pretty." Margaret nodded slowly, her smile fading into something more contemplative. "You're not wrong. But you'll learn in time that wealth comes with its own set of challenges. It can isolate you, distort the way people see you, and the way you see yourself." Trevor didn't respond, unsure what to make of her words. He worked in silence, feeling Margaret's gaze on him the entire time. When he finished, he stood, wiping his hands on a rag. "The leak's fixed," he said. "Good," Margaret replied, walking him to the door. "Thank you for your work, Trevor. You've given me a lot to think about." Trevor raised an eyebrow, confused. "Me? I'm just the plumber." Margaret smiled, her eyes twinkling. "Everyone has something to teach, whether they realize it or not." As Trevor stepped outside and the door closed behind him, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last time he'd see Margaret. There was something about her, something that made him question everything he thought he knew about life, wealth, and what truly mattered. A week after his first visit to the sprawling mansion, Trevor was surprised to receive a call from Margaret's assistant. The voice on the other end was calm and professional, asking if Trevor could return to the estate for a meeting with Mrs. Margaret herself. Trevor hesitated for a moment. Why would someone as wealthy and refined as Margaret want to meet with a plumber? But curiosity, and the chance to step back into that luxurious world, got the better of him. "Sure," he said, trying to keep his voice casual. "I'll be there." When he arrived, the gates opened as smoothly as before, and Trevor felt the same awe creeping in as he drove up the long driveway. Margaret greeted him at the door, her demeanor as poised as ever. "Trevor," she said warmly, gesturing for him to come inside. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Of course," he replied, his toolbox absent this time. "What can I help you with?" Margaret led him to the sitting room, a space adorned with elegant furniture and framed photographs of what Trevor assumed were family members. She gestured for him to sit before settling into a chair opposite him. "I'll get straight to the point," she said, her tone both calm and resolute. "I've been thinking a lot since we last spoke." Trevor tilted his head, unsure where this was going. "About what?" "About you," Margaret said, her sharp eyes studying him, "and about an arrangement that might benefit us both." "An arrangement?" Trevor repeated, a note of confusion in his voice. Margaret leaned back, her expression unreadable. "Trevor, I've spent most of my life building wealth, connections, and a reputation. But none of that can change the fact that I'm alone. My late husband passed away years ago, and though I have acquaintances, I have no one I truly trust." Trevor nodded slowly, unsure what to say. "I'm not looking for love or romance," Margaret continued. "What I need is a companion. Someone who can be by my side, help me navigate the complexities of my life, and ensure that I'm not taken advantage of in my later years." Trevor's brow furrowed. "I'm not sure I'm following." Margaret smiled faintly. "Let me be blunt. I want you to marry me." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Trevor blinked, certain he'd misheard. "Excuse me?" "I said I want you to marry me," Margaret repeated, her tone steady. "Not for love, but for practicality. In return, I'll ensure your future is secure. Financially, you'll never have to worry again." Trevor stared at her, his mind reeling. "You're serious?" "Quite serious," Margaret said, her expression unwavering. "Why me?" he asked, still trying to process her words. "You could find someone more suitable." Margaret chuckled lightly. "Because you're honest, perhaps too honest. You're not polished or pretentious, and I believe that makes you trustworthy. Besides, I see potential in you, Trevor. You have ambition, but you lack direction. I can help with that." Trevor leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "This is a lot to take in." "I imagine it is," Margaret said, her voice softening. "Take the night to think about it. Come back tomorrow with your answer." That night, Trevor lay awake in his small, cramped apartment, staring at the ceiling. Margaret's proposal echoed in his mind. On one hand, it seemed insane. Marry a woman 50 years his senior. But on the other hand, it was an opportunity like no other. He thought about his current life. Endless days of back-breaking work, struggling to make rent, and dreaming of something better. Margaret's wealth could change everything. Trevor sat up, rubbing his face. "It's not like she's asking for love," he muttered to himself. "It's a business deal." The decision weighed heavily on him, but as the night wore on, his ambition won out. The next morning, Trevor returned to Margaret's mansion. She was waiting for him in the same sitting room, her expression calm but expectant. "Well?" she asked as he sat down. Trevor took a deep breath, meeting her gaze. "I'll do it." Margaret's lips curved into a small smile. "You've made a wise choice, Trevor. I think this will work out well for both of us." Though he returned her smile, Trevor couldn't shake the voice in the back of his mind reminding him that his agreement had nothing to do with Margaret herself. It was the promise of wealth and security that had driven his decision. As he left the mansion that day, the enormity of what he'd agreed to began to settle in. While Margaret seemed content and confident, Trevor couldn't help but wonder what he was truly getting himself into. The day of the wedding arrived with little fanfare. Margaret had insisted on keeping the ceremony intimate and understated, much to Trevor's relief. A simple gathering was held in the grand living room of her mansion, attended by only a few of her closest acquaintances and Trevor's bewildered friends. Trevor stood at the front of the room, adjusting the collar of his suit nervously. It felt surreal. Just days ago he had been fixing pipes in this very house, and now he was marrying its owner. Margaret entered the room with quiet grace, her silver hair styled elegantly, and a tailored dress that exuded class. She didn't look like a blushing bride, but she carried herself with the poise of someone who knew exactly what she wanted and wasn't afraid to claim it. As the officiant began the ceremony, Trevor couldn't shake the mixture of unease and anticipation swirling in his chest. When they exchanged vows, Margaret's words were direct, devoid of flowery sentiment but filled with sincerity. "I promise to be your partner in this journey, to respect the terms of our agreement, and to ensure that we both gain from this union." Trevor hesitated before repeating his vows, his mind catching on the practicality of it all. Yet, as he slipped the ring onto Margaret's finger, and she did the same for him, he felt the weight of the moment settle over him. This wasn't just a deal, it was the beginning of something he couldn't quite define. After the ceremony, Margaret hosted a modest reception in the mansion's dining hall. The atmosphere was subdued, with polite conversations and clinking glasses of champagne. Trevor's friends, though dressed in their best clothes, still looked out of place among the wealthy guests. "Man, you really did it," one of his friends whispered, nudging him. "I mean, look at this place. You're set for life." Trevor forced a smile, the words leaving an odd taste in his mouth. That evening, Trevor moved into the mansion, carrying only a few bags of clothes and personal belongings. Margaret had already prepared a room for him, separate from her own. "This will be your space," she explained, showing him the large, well-furnished guest room. "You're free to make yourself at home, but I expect you to respect my routines and preferences." "Of course," Trevor replied, feeling a flicker of unease. Over the next few days, Trevor began to settle into his new life, though it was far from what he had imagined. The mansion was quiet, almost eerily so, and Margaret kept to herself for the most part. But gradually their paths began to cross more often. Margaret would invite him to join her for breakfast in the sunlit dining room, where they'd exchange polite conversation over coffee and toast. In the evenings, they'd occasionally sit in the library, Margaret reading while Trevor aimlessly scrolled on his phone. At first, Trevor found her aloof demeanor intimidating, but he soon realized there was more to her than met the eye. Margaret had a sharp wit and a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard. She spoke with the confidence of someone who had seen the world and weathered its storms, and her stories often left him captivated. One evening after dinner, Trevor found Margaret in the sitting room, staring at an old photograph on the mantel. "Is that your husband?" he asked, gesturing to the picture. Margaret nodded, her expression softening. "Yes, Charles. He was a good man, though we had our differences." "What happened to him?" Trevor asked cautiously. "He passed away nearly 10 years ago," Margaret said, her voice steady. "It was sudden. A heart attack." "I'm sorry," Trevor said, unsure what else to say. Margaret turned to him, a faint smile on her lips. "Don't be. Life moves on and so must we." She gestured for him to sit, and for the first time, Trevor saw a different side of her, a side that was vulnerable yet strong. "Trevor," she began, "I wasn't always wealthy, you know. I grew up in a small town, in a family that barely scraped by. My father was a factory worker, and my mother cleaned houses. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college." Trevor blinked, surprised. "You never mentioned that before." Margaret chuckled. "Most people don't ask. They see the house, the money, and assume it was always this way." She leaned back in her chair, her gaze distant. "Charles and I built our fortune from scratch. He had the vision, and I had the grit to make it happen. But it wasn't easy. We lost everything more than once before we finally succeeded." Trevor stared at her, his mind racing. He had assumed Margaret's wealth was inherited, a byproduct of privilege. But hearing her story, he felt a pang of shame for how he had judged her, and for why he had agreed to this marriage in the first place. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked quietly. Margaret met his gaze, her expression calm but piercing. "Because I want you to understand that wealth means nothing if you lose yourself along the way. I've seen too many people chase money and end up with nothing of real value." Trevor looked away, her words cutting deeper than he expected. He had married her for money. There was no denying that. But now, sitting here with her, hearing her story, he felt an unfamiliar tug of guilt, and something else he couldn't quite name. Margaret placed a hand on his arm, her touch light but firm. "Trevor, life has a way of teaching us what truly matters. I hope, for your sake, you learn that lesson sooner rather than later." As she stood and left the room, Trevor remained seated, her words echoing in his mind. For the first time since agreeing to this marriage, he began to question not just his motives, but himself. 3 days after the quiet, understated wedding, Trevor found himself slowly adjusting to life in the mansion. Despite the surreal luxury surrounding him, he couldn't shake a lingering sense of unease. The practical nature of the marriage gnawed at him, but he reassured himself that it was all worth it for the future Margaret had promised. It was late in the afternoon when Trevor wandered into Margaret's study, a room she had told him was off limits unless invited. But she wasn't home at the time. She had gone to a board meeting for one of her charities, and curiosity got the better of him. The room was as grand as the rest of the mansion, with towering bookshelves, a mahogany desk, and sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Trevor's eyes scanned the room, eventually landing on a stack of papers neatly arranged on the desk. He hesitated for a moment, glancing toward the door, before stepping closer. At the top of the stack was a legal document with bold letters that caught his eye: Last Will and Testament of Margaret Kingsley. Trevor's heart skipped a beat. He told himself he shouldn't, but his hands moved before his mind could catch up, flipping through the pages. As his eyes scanned the text, each line hit him like a punch to the gut. Margaret intended to donate her entire estate to charity upon her death. Every penny, every asset, even the mansion itself, it was all going to various organizations and causes. There wasn't a single mention of Trevor in the will. His breath quickened as he stepped back, the papers slipping from his hands. The room seemed to close in around him, his mind spinning with disbelief. "She lied to me," he muttered under his breath. Trevor stumbled out of the study, the weight of the discovery pressing down on him. He paced the hallway, his thoughts a chaotic swirl of anger and betrayal. He had entered this marriage under the assumption that he would benefit financially, that he would finally escape the grind of his old life. But now, it seemed Margaret had outsmarted him. That evening, Margaret returned home as if nothing had changed. She greeted Trevor with her usual composed demeanor, asking about his day as they sat down for dinner. Trevor could barely look at her, his appetite gone. "Is everything all right?" Margaret asked, her sharp eyes studying him. Trevor forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, just tired." Margaret nodded slowly, not pressing further. But Trevor could sense that she knew something was off. Over the next few days, Trevor's attitude shifted. He became distant, avoiding prolonged conversations with Margaret and finding excuses to leave the house. She noticed, of course. Margaret was nothing if not observant, and Trevor's behavior was far from subtle. One afternoon, as they sat in the sunroom, Margaret set down her teacup and folded her hands in her lap. "Trevor," she said, her tone calm but firm, "is there something you'd like to talk about?" Trevor stiffened, his gaze fixed on the floor. "No, everything's fine." "Are you sure?" she pressed gently. "You've seemed preoccupied lately." "I'm fine," he said quickly, standing and walking toward the door. "I just need some air." Margaret watched him leave, her expression unreadable. That evening, Trevor sat alone in his room, replaying the moment he found the will over and over in his mind. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. "She used me," he muttered, his fists clenching. "She knew I'd agreed to this marriage because of the money, and she didn't say a word about her plans." But beneath the anger there was something else, a flicker of shame. Margaret had been nothing but honest with him about her intentions for their marriage. She had never promised him wealth or love, only companionship. It was Trevor who had assumed he would benefit financially. The realization left him feeling hollow, but his pride wouldn't let him confront her. Margaret, meanwhile, observed Trevor's behavior with quiet patience. She had her suspicions about what was troubling him, but she chose not to address it directly. Instead, she carried on as usual, giving him the space to process whatever was weighing on him. Late one night, she found herself sitting in the study, staring at the same stack of papers Trevor had discovered days earlier. She knew it was only a matter of time before he stumbled upon her will. It was part of the reason she had left it out. Margaret sighed, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Let's see what you're really made of, Trevor," she murmured to herself. As the days turned into a week, the tension between them grew. Trevor felt trapped, unsure of how to navigate the situation. He avoided Margaret as much as possible, but her calm and collected demeanor only added to his frustration. One evening, as he sat alone on the back patio, staring out at the garden, he couldn't shake the memory of Margaret's words from their earlier conversations. "Life has a way of teaching us what truly matters." Trevor frowned, his anger slowly giving way to doubt. What if Margaret's decision to donate her fortune wasn't a trick but a lesson? What if she was testing him, waiting to see if he could rise above his greed? The thought left him conflicted, unsure of what to do next. For the first time in his life, Trevor began to question not only his motives but also the kind of person he wanted to be. The tension between Trevor and Margaret had been building for days. The mansion, once filled with a quiet but comfortable rhythm, now felt heavy with unspoken words. Trevor found himself avoiding her more and more, retreating to his room or taking long walks through the sprawling garden to clear his mind. But no matter how far he walked, his thoughts always circled back to Margaret. Her calm presence, her sharp wit, her quiet strength, they were qualities he couldn't ignore, qualities that had begun to overshadow his original motivations. One evening, Margaret announced that dinner would be served in the formal dining room, a rare occasion in their household. Trevor suspected this was no ordinary meal. When he arrived, the table was set with fine china and candles flickering softly. Margaret sat at the head of the table, her posture as poised as ever. She gestured for him to sit across from her, a faint smile on her lips. "Trevor," she began as they started eating, her tone measured, "you've been unusually quiet these past few days. Is there something on your mind?" Trevor hesitated, his fork hovering over his plate. "No, I've just been thinking, that's all." Margaret's gaze sharpened. "Thinking about what?" He set his fork down, avoiding her eyes. "About us. About this whole arrangement." Margaret leaned back slightly, folding her hands in her lap. "Do you regret marrying me?" The question hung in the air, cutting through the carefully maintained facade of civility between them. Trevor's chest tightened, the weight of his emotions threatening to spill over. "I don't know," he admitted finally, his voice low. "I guess I thought it would be different." "Different how?" Margaret pressed, her tone calm but insistent. Trevor sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I thought I'd have it all figured out by now. The money, the security, I thought it would make everything better. But it hasn't." Margaret tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "And why do you think that is?" Trevor hesitated, struggling to find the right words. "Because I didn't really understand what I was getting into. I didn't understand you." Margaret raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on." Trevor took a deep breath, his heart pounding. "When I married you, it was about the money. That's all I cared about. I thought if I could just secure my future, nothing else would matter. But then I got to know you, really know you, and now I feel ashamed." Margaret's eyes softened, though her expression remained steady. "Ashamed of what?" "Of how I judged you," Trevor said, his voice trembling. "Of how I assumed you were just some rich woman looking for a companion to kill time with. But you're so much more than that. You're smart and kind, and you've lived a life I can't even begin to imagine." For the first time, Margaret's composure seemed to waver. She studied him carefully, her eyes searching his face for any hint of insincerity. "Do you mean that?" she asked quietly. Trevor nodded, his throat tight. "Yes, I do." Margaret set her fork down, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Thank you for saying that, Trevor. It means more to me than you know." He looked at her, his brow furrowing. "Why did you choose me, Margaret? Out of all the people you could have married, why me?" Margaret leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on the table. "Because you reminded me of myself. Ambitious, restless, hungry for something more. But unlike most people in your position, you have potential. You just don't know how to harness it yet." Trevor stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "And you thought marrying me would help me figure it out?" Margaret chuckled softly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I simply saw an opportunity to teach you something about life. Either way, I think we've both learned more than we expected from each other." Trevor couldn't help but smile faintly, his admiration for her growing with every word. "You're incredible, you know that." Margaret laughed, a genuine, warm sound that filled the room. "I've been called many things, Trevor, but incredible isn't usually one of them." As the evening wore on, their conversation shifted to lighter topics: Margaret's travels, Trevor's dreams, and the quirks of living in such a massive house. For the first time since their wedding, the tension between them seemed to dissolve, replaced by a newfound sense of connection. When the meal ended, Trevor stood and hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Margaret, I don't know what the future holds for us. But I want to do better. I want to be better for you and for myself." Margaret rose from her seat, her gaze steady and kind. "That's all I've ever wanted for you, Trevor. And for what it's worth, I think you're already on the right path." As they parted ways for the night, Trevor felt a flicker of something he hadn't expected: hope. For the first time, he realized that this marriage, unconventional as it was, might just be the turning point he had been searching for all along. The next morning, Trevor woke with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Margaret's words from the previous evening still lingered in his mind, their truth stirring something deep within him. For too long he had been chasing an illusion of success, but now he saw a chance to redefine what that meant. As he stepped into the sunlit dining room, Margaret was already seated, her tea steaming in a delicate porcelain cup. She looked up from the morning paper, her sharp eyes softening when she saw him. "Good morning," she said. "Morning," Trevor replied, sitting across from her. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I was wondering if I could join you today, on one of your charity visits." Margaret's eyebrows lifted slightly, but she gave no indication of surprise. "Are you sure? It's not exactly glamorous work." Trevor nodded. "I'm sure. I want to see what you do and why you do it." Margaret regarded him thoughtfully for a moment before nodding. "Very well. We'll leave after breakfast." By mid-morning, they arrived at a community center Margaret had helped fund years ago. The building was modest but well-maintained, bustling with volunteers and families seeking assistance. Margaret introduced Trevor to the staff, who greeted her with warmth and respect. It was clear she wasn't just a benefactor, she was an integral part of their mission. "Come," Margaret said, handing Trevor a pair of gloves. "Let's see if you're as good with a paintbrush as you are with a wrench." Trevor spent the next few hours helping repaint one of the classrooms, his shirt speckled with white paint by the time they were done. As they worked, Margaret moved through the center with ease, chatting with volunteers and offering quiet encouragement to those who needed it. For the first time, Trevor saw her not as a wealthy widow, but as a force of nature, a woman who used her resources to create meaningful change. Over the following weeks, Trevor joined Margaret on more of her visits. He helped serve meals at a shelter, repaired furniture for a struggling family, and even spoke to a group of teenagers about finding purpose in their lives. The work was exhausting but fulfilling. For the first time, Trevor felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. Back at the mansion, Trevor began to make small changes as well. He noticed that many things around the house were in need of attention: squeaky hinges, leaky faucets, and jammed drawers. Rather than calling in a contractor, he decided to take matters into his own hands. One afternoon, Margaret walked into the kitchen to find Trevor crouched under the sink, his toolbox beside him. "What are you doing?" she asked, bemused. "Fixing the leak," Trevor said, grinning as he wiped his hands on a rag. "It's what I do, remember?" Margaret chuckled. "I could have had someone come in to handle that." "And charge you an arm and a leg?" "No way," Trevor said, shaking his head. "Besides, I like fixing things. It's satisfying." Margaret smiled, a rare warmth in her expression. "Very well. Carry on then." The house, once cold and impersonal, began to feel alive again. Trevor's presence brought an unexpected energy to the space. He would hum as he worked, crack jokes with the staff, and occasionally convince Margaret to join him in the kitchen to bake something simple but delicious. One evening, as they sat in the library, Margaret looked up from her book to see Trevor tinkering with the fireplace. "Trevor," she said, her voice soft but firm. He turned, his hands smudged with soot. "Yeah. I've noticed you've been different lately," she said, setting her book down. Trevor hesitated, unsure how to respond. "In a good way or a bad way?" Margaret smiled faintly. "In a good way. You seem at peace." Trevor leaned against the mantel, nodding slowly. "I guess I am. For the first time, I feel like I'm actually contributing to something real. Something that matters." Margaret's eyes softened, but she didn't say anything more. She simply picked up her book and resumed reading, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. As the days turned into weeks, Trevor's transformation became undeniable. He was no longer the man who had entered this marriage for money. Instead, he was someone who had found meaning and purpose in the most unexpected places. Margaret, ever observant, watched his journey with quiet pride. Though she never said it outright, her faith in Trevor had been rewarded. He was becoming the person she had always believed he could be, a man capable of not only changing his own life, but also the lives of those around him. The grand hall of Margaret's mansion was alive with activity. The chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting a warm glow over the elegantly dressed guests who mingled and sipped champagne. The event, a charity gala Margaret had been planning for months, was a gathering of the city's most influential philanthropists, community leaders, and benefactors. Trevor adjusted his tie nervously as he stood near the entrance, watching the room fill with people who seemed worlds away from his humble beginnings. He had been helping Margaret organize the event, but he hadn't expected her to ask him to play such a significant role. "Trevor," Margaret's calm voice brought him back to the present. She approached him with her usual grace, her silver gown shimmering softly. "Are you ready?" He swallowed hard, his palms damp. "Not really. I'm not exactly a public speaker." Margaret placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You'll do fine. Just speak from the heart. That's all anyone wants to hear." Trevor nodded, though the knot in his stomach remained. As the guests settled into their seats, Margaret stepped onto the small stage at the front of the room. She welcomed everyone with her characteristic poise, her words weaving a narrative of gratitude and hope for the future. "And now," she said, her eyes sweeping over the crowd, "I'd like to introduce someone who has become an integral part of my life and the work we do here. Trevor, would you join me?" Trevor stood, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room as he made his way to the stage. Margaret stepped aside, giving him the floor. He cleared his throat, gripping the edges of the podium. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice shaky but steadying with each word. "When Margaret asked me to speak tonight, my first thought was, why me? I'm not a businessman or a philanthropist. I'm just a plumber who got lucky." A ripple of laughter eased the tension in the room, and Trevor took a deep breath, gaining confidence. "The truth is, when I first met Margaret, I was lost," he continued. "I thought money was the answer to everything. I thought if I could just find a way to escape the life I had, everything would fall into place. So when Margaret proposed our arrangement, I jumped at the chance, not because I understood what it meant, but because I saw an opportunity to get ahead." The room grew quiet, the weight of his confession hanging in the air. "But I was wrong," Trevor said, his voice thick with emotion, "because what Margaret gave me wasn't just a way out. She gave me a way forward. She showed me what it means to care about something bigger than yourself, to use what you have to make a difference in the lives of others." He paused, his eyes scanning the room. "I'm not proud of the reasons I said yes to this marriage, but I'm proud of what it's become. And I'm proud to stand here tonight, knowing that Margaret has taught me not only the value of giving but the value of living with purpose." A wave of applause erupted as Trevor stepped back from the podium, his chest heaving with relief and emotion. He turned to Margaret, who was smiling, her eyes shimmering with pride. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of handshakes and conversations. Guests approached Trevor, some with words of encouragement, others with curiosity about his story. For the first time, he felt like he belonged, not because of wealth or status, but because he had found a sense of purpose. Later that night, after the last of the guests had departed, Trevor found Margaret sitting in the library, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked up as he entered, motioning for him to join her. "You did well tonight," she said, her tone warm. "Thanks," Trevor said, sitting across from her. "But I think you planned this all along, didn't you?" Margaret's smile widened. "Perhaps. But I wanted you to see for yourself what you're capable of." She reached into a drawer and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table to him. "What's this?" he asked, picking it up. "Open it," Margaret said simply. Trevor unfolded the letter inside, his eyes scanning the words. As he read, his breath caught. Margaret had written that she was transferring a portion of her estate to him, not as an inheritance, but as a trust for the charitable work they had been doing together. "I'm entrusting you with this," Margaret said, her voice steady, "because I believe in you, Trevor. I believe you have the heart and the determination to continue what we've started. But there's one condition: you must promise to use it for good." Trevor's hands trembled as he set the letter down, his eyes brimming with tears. "Why are you doing this for me?" "Because I've watched you grow," Margaret said, her gaze unwavering. "You've become someone who understands the value of giving, someone who can inspire others to do the same. That's worth more to me than any amount of money." Trevor lowered his head, wiping at his eyes. "I don't know if I deserve this." Margaret reached across the table, placing a hand over his. "You do. And I have no doubt you'll prove it to yourself in time." That night, as Trevor sat alone in his room, the letter still in his hands, he felt an overwhelming mix of gratitude and resolve. Margaret's faith in him had given him a second chance, not just to redeem himself, but to create a life that truly mattered. For the first time, Trevor allowed himself to believe that he was capable of more than he had ever imagined. And he silently vowed to honor Margaret's trust, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The years that followed Margaret's gala marked a transformation not only in Trevor's life, but in the lives of countless others. With her guidance and eventual passing, Trevor had stepped fully into his role as the head of the charitable foundation she had left behind. The Margaret Kingsley Foundation had become a beacon of hope for those in need, funding projects that ranged from community centers and shelters to education programs and disaster relief efforts. Trevor, once a plumber searching for a quick escape from his struggles, now found himself deeply embedded in the world of philanthropy. It was a sunny afternoon when Trevor walked through the bustling headquarters of the foundation. The building, once an empty shell, now buzzed with energy, Volunteers and staff moved purposefully, their dedication evident in the way they spoke and worked. Trevor greeted them as he passed, exchanging smiles and brief conversations. In his office, a large portrait of Margaret hung on the wall, her serene expression a constant reminder of the woman who had changed his life. Trevor often found himself looking at it during moments of doubt, her image grounding him in the purpose they had built together. That evening, after the last meeting of the day, Trevor lingered in the office, the soft glow of the desk lamp illuminating the papers spread before him. Reports of new projects and letters from beneficiaries filled the desk, each one a testament to the foundation's impact. He leaned back in his chair, staring at Margaret's portrait. "You'd laugh if you saw me now," he said aloud, a wry smile tugging at his lips. A guy who didn't even know what philanthropy meant, running one of the biggest charities in the city. His smile faded, replaced by a look of deep gratitude. "But you knew, didn't you? You saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself." Trevor stood, walking over to the portrait. He placed a hand on the frame, his voice soft but filled with emotion. "Thank you, Margaret. For everything. For not giving up on me when I didn't deserve it. For showing me that life isn't about what you take, but what you give." The next morning, Trevor attended the opening of a new community center funded by the foundation. The center, dedicated to Margaret's memory, was filled with children playing, parents chatting, and staff preparing for the day's programs. As Trevor cut the ribbon, a round of applause erupted, and he couldn't help but feel a swell of pride, not for himself, but for the legacy he was continuing. One of the children approached him, holding a crayon drawing of the center with the words "Thank you" scrawled across the top. "For me?" Trevor asked, kneeling to the child's level. The boy nodded shyly. "Thank you for building this place." Trevor's throat tightened as he accepted the drawing. "No, thank you," he said. "You're the reason we do this." That night, back in his office, Trevor placed the crayon drawing next to Margaret's portrait. The room was quiet, the world outside slowing down, but inside, Trevor felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He sat down, folding his hands in front of him, and gazed at the portrait. "You taught me that wealth is just a tool," he said softly. "It's the way we use it that defines us. And because of you, I finally understand what it means to live a life that matters." As the city lights twinkled outside the window, Trevor leaned back in his chair, the weight of his journey settling comfortably on his shoulders. Margaret had given him more than a chance, she had given him a purpose. And now, with every project, every life touched, and every act of kindness, Trevor carried her legacy forward, ensuring that her vision of compassion and generosity would endure for generations to come. The crayon drawing and Margaret's portrait stood side by side, symbols of the past, present, and future, a reminder that even the unlikeliest of beginnings can lead to a life of profound meaning. As Trevor stood before Margaret's portrait, a man transformed by love, wisdom, and purpose, he reminded us all that life's greatest gifts often come from the most unexpected places. Margaret's faith in him not only changed his life but also inspired a legacy of kindness that would impact generations to come. This story teaches us the power of second chances, the importance of giving back, and how true wealth is measured by the lives we touch. If this tale moved your heart, don't forget to like and share this video with someone who might need a little inspiration today. And for more soul-stirring stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time with another story that reminds us of the beauty of the human spirit.